The strange job interview. Oliver was excited but also nervous as he prepared for his job interview at Wren & Company, a mysterious company known for its secrecy. He had applied on a whim, not expecting a response, but here he was, standing outside the company's sleek, glassy building. He straightened his tie, took a deep breath, and went inside, determined to put his best foot forward. When Oliver stepped up to the receptionist's desk, the woman behind it barely looked up. "Name?" she asked briskly, tapping away on her computer. "Oliver Brooks," he replied, trying to sound confident. "Take the elevator to the 5th floor. A Miss Finch will be waiting for you," she said, dismissively waving him off. Oliver shrugged it off and made his way to the elevator. When he reached the 5th floor, he stepped out and found himself in a dimly lit hallway. There was only one door with a small brass sign reading "Interview Room." He knocked, and a voice called out, "Come on in." As Oliver entered, he saw a woman in her mid-40s sitting behind a long table. She wore thick-rimmed glasses and had an air of authority about her. "Take a seat, Mr. Brooks," she said, gesturing to a chair in front of her. "Thank you," Oliver said, pulling up a chair and sitting down. Miss Finch gave him a long look, then glanced down at his resume. "So, Mr. Brooks, you're here to interview for the junior analyst position?" "That's correct," Oliver replied, nodding. "Well, let's get down to it, then." Miss Finch leaned back in her chair, looking him over as if sizing him up. "Tell me about a time you had to think on your feet." Oliver had prepared for typical questions, but this was different. He tried to think back to a suitable experience and remembered a project he had been thrown into during his last internship. "There was a time at my last job when my manager called me in at the last minute. I had to take over a project that had nearly fallen apart. I had to pick up on the details quickly, bring the team up to speed, and wrap things up in a short time frame." Ms. Finch's eyebrow lifted slightly. "Interesting," she said, her voice neutral. "And when things get tough, would you say you're more likely to stick it out or throw in the towel?" Oliver was starting to get a bit thrown off by her tone, but he pushed on. "I'm definitely not one to give up. I always try to push through, even if things get rough." She nodded and scribbled something on her notepad. Then, without warning, she reached into her drawer, pulled out a small black envelope, and handed it to him. "Open it up," she said, leaning back with a faint smile. Oliver took the envelope and tore it open carefully. Inside, there was a small card that read, "Take the red folder from the table behind you and bring it to the office at the end of the hall." Okay," he muttered, turning around and noticing a red folder sitting alone on a small table behind him. As he got up to retrieve it, he felt a surge of confusion. He hadn't expected an interview task like this. He picked up the red folder, and before he could turn around, Ms. Finch had vanished from her seat. The room was empty. Oliver scratched his head, thrown for a loop. He headed to the hallway, looking for the office she had mentioned. At the end of the hall, he saw a door labeled Office A. He knocked but heard no response, so he pushed the door open and walked in. The office was empty, save for a large desk with a note that read, "Sit down and wait for instructions." Oliver sighed and sat down, clutching the red folder. After a few minutes, the phone on the desk rang. He picked it up cautiously. "Mr. Brooks?" It was a male voice, deep and calm. "Yes, speaking," Oliver replied. "Excellent. I'm Mr. Wren. I'd like you to open up the folder and read out the document inside." Oliver opened the folder, finding a single sheet of paper with instructions. It says, "Go to the storage room on the 4th floor and look for the box marked Case A32. Bring it back to Office A immediately. Thank you, Mr. Brooks." "We're counting on you to handle it," Mr. Wren's voice said before hanging up abruptly. Oliver sighed again but headed off to the 4th floor. When he stepped out of the elevator, he noticed the entire floor seemed to be filled with filing cabinets and stacks of boxes. "Case A32, he muttered, scanning the labels. After several minutes, he finally spotted it, a slightly dusty box marked Case A32 in faded ink. He picked it up, surprised by its weight, and started back toward the elevator. The box was heavier than he expected, but he managed to lug it back up to Office A. When he arrived, the office was empty again. He set the box on the desk, wondering what to do next. Then he noticed another envelope lying on the desk with his name written on it. He tore it open, pulling out another card. Congratulations on finding case A32. You've completed task 1. Now, take the case to the conference room on the 7th floor. At this point, Oliver was completely bewildered, but he couldn't back out now. Alright, I guess I'm in it for the long haul, he muttered, grabbing the box again and heading up to the 7th floor. The conference room was at the far end of the floor, and when he arrived, he found 3 people sitting around a table, all wearing formal suits. They looked up when he entered, watching him intently. "Ah, Mr. Brooks," one of them said, standing up. "You've made it through the first stage of the interview." "The first stage?" Oliver asked, feeling both exhausted and amused. "Yes. Wren & Company values people who can think on their feet, follow instructions, and stay committed, even when things seem a bit unusual," the man explained with a grin. "Many candidates don't make it this far." Oliver managed to smile. "So, what's next?" The man nodded and gestured for him to sit down. "The next stage involves teamwork. We'll assign you to a team, and you'll work together to complete a task. But first, let's see if you can come up with a strategy on the spot." For the next hour, Oliver was put through a series of collaborative tasks with the other candidates, each one stranger than the last. They had to piece together puzzles, analyze strange documents, and even solve riddles that made little sense at first. Finally, after what felt like a whirlwind of tasks, Oliver and his team were led back to office A. Mr. Wren himself walked in, giving them all an approving nod. "Well done, everyone," he said, smiling warmly. "This interview was designed to test not just your skills, but your resilience, creativity, and ability to think outside the box. I believe you all did an excellent job." Oliver felt a rush of relief and pride as Mr. Wren continued, "Congratulations, Mr. Brooks. You've shown us that you can rise to any challenge. Welcome to Wren & Company." As he walked out of the building later that day, Oliver couldn't help but laugh at how unusual the day had been. He'd gone in for a regular interview but ended up with a series of strange, thrilling tests. And he knew one thing for sure: if this was what working at Wren & Company was like, he was definitely in for an adventure.